Hey, Leo.
Rabbi,
Good to see
how are
you.
you?
Baruch Hashem. How things?
Bye.
Hi,
Oh,
everyone.
Hello.
Hey,
Hi, Rabbi.
hello. How are you?
well, it's nice to
Hi.
see you and everyone else because I
Oh,
haven't
nice to
seen
see you
in
too.
person, but maybe next year.
Yeah, Bezrat Hashem.
Bezrat Hashem.
Yes. I'm on the
Nice,
list of
man.
high risk. So
100%.
Hmm.
Hi, Mala. Hi, Stan. Who's read me?
Hi, nice to see you.
Good to see you too. Naomi, is that you? Was that Myra?
And that is me. For some reason,
Myra.
my account
I
is.
was hoping,
Please
you
sign
know.
out of my account.
Huh?
I want to use my Zoom, so
You-
please sign out of my account.
I got to sign out of her account. I don't know why she's using my. Okay, well, it's a different story.
All right, let's not go there.
I'll be back.
The frustration you give me is
All right. We're just going to wait a minute or two to allow people to come in. Okay, I think we'll start. We're recording the class because a lot of people asked me to record it to make sure if they can't make it tonight that they can hear it afterwards. Okay, so first of all, I want to give a special thanks to Richard Wood for arranging this very, very interesting class, a class which you don't hear every day, especially a class which you don't hear every day from someone as experienced as Rabbi Zivotovsky. I must say, Rabbi, I had the pleasure of seeing you and saying hello to you. I don't know if you remember me in Sharet Tzedek last year. I believe you were here for a short stint, or whatever it was. Rabbi Federgren just mentioned when he saw the poster, he said that, yeah, he was here last year. And I said, oh, now I remember. And I made the connection. He said, he told me you wrote for Mishpacha extensively and other scholarly articles in general. Rabbi Zivotovsky is actually a shochet. Are you a practicing shochet or not?
No.
Not
on a regular basis.
Okay, not on a regular basis. But the rabbi has received smicha from YU. He is also a He also guides tours to exotic areas in various places, and he is a professor of neuroscience at Bar-Ilan University. What I think is so incredible with this specific class is where you have the blend of science and Torah, someone who's as learned as the rabbi, and also who's accomplished in the scientific world. That you see the beautiful blend of Torah and Madad together, which we'll hear so beautifully. Actually, Richard sent me out a short video of the rabbi giving a class on the Kashrut of the giraffe and showing the different pictures and the anatomy. I was so incredibly excited. So without any further ado, Rabbi, thank you very, very much for joining us. And the floor is all yours.
Okay, thank you for having me. This is the quickest trip into Vancouver and out that anybody's made. Good morning to all of you. And if anybody else would like to turn on their cameras, it's always easier to teach when you have live people there rather than these little black boxes, although we've all become accustomed to this Zoom world. Okay, let me try to share screen and get started with the topic. If you could just give me the screen sharing.
Yeah, just did.
You have to either make me a host or...
You should be able to share now.
Nope, it says host disabled.
No, let me make you a co-host anyway. Here we go. Okay.
No, doesn't seem to. Not working.
Still not working.
It hasn't. I don't see that I've converted to a co-host either.
Okay, well that's not very good. 1 second. No.
Oh, no, hold on. There we go. Yeah. No. Now it should work. There we go. We're ready to go.
Okay.
Okay, you should now see the PowerPoint. Okay, do you see it? Okay, so even though you were told I'm going to talk about the Kashrut of giraffe, we have to link it somehow to this week's parsha. So I'm going to start with how many giraffes were in Noah's Ark. And in all the pictures that we're used to, we see always 2 giraffes in Noah's Ark. We know that the Torah tells us that Mikol Chaya, Mikol Shtayim, Mikol Tavi, and that's Mikol Remes Admal Meneu Shnayim and Mikol. So it starts off the Torah telling Noah that he's supposed to bring 2 of every animal, and then continues, it says Mikol Behem HaTorah Tikach Lecha Shiva Shiva. That the Torah tells Noah that of the kosher animals, he should bring 7. And it's either 7 or 7 plus 7, meaning 7 pairs. But it's not 2. It's either 7 or 14. And then the Torah continues and tells us, what did Noah do with all of these kosher animals? And it tells us that from all of the kosher animals, Mikol Be'emat Torah, Mikol Ofa Tahor, from all the kosher animals and the kosher birds, V'yal Olot B'mezbeach. When Noah got out of the ark, he brought a sacrifice from the kosher animals. But the question is, from all of the kosher animals, we know, for example, that in the Mishkan and in the Beit HaMikdash, you were only allowed to bring sacrifices from 2 kosher birds, the pigeon and the dove. From the animals, it was only 3 kosher animals, the bovine, the sheep, and the goat. So he only had those 3. Was it all? Did he bring also sacrifices from deer, from antelope, and if giraffe is kosher, did he bring from giraffe? Well, it's very interesting. The Talmud tells us. Did I lose you there? Hold on. Do you still see the PowerPoint?
Yeah, we're good.
I don't. Hold on. Open the second time. Okay. The Talmud tells us that until the Mishkan was built, עד שלא הוקם המשכן, הבהמות מותרות ועבודה בבחורות והכל כשרן, להקריב בהמה, חייב עוף זרחים ונקריבות, טהורים אבל לא טמאים. Meaning, before there was the Mishkan, you were allowed to bring sacrifices from all kosher animals. And that sounds very strange, but what's amazing, there was a fantastic find in Shomron, near what they think is Joshua's Ark, Mount Abel. The archaeologists describe examining the bones in the laboratories of Hebrew University's Department of Zoology. Sorry, it's not Bar Ilan. This was done in Hebrew. Took several months, 10 months for us, the excavators. When so-and-so who did the bone analysis brought us the results, they were very surprising. This is, again, what they think was an altar used by Joshua when the Jews came into the land. Except for the bones of a wild rabbit and a hedgehog that happened to die at this site that lived, 942 bones were examined, representing 50 to 100 species. They were attributed to 4 kinds of animals: goat, sheep, cattle, and fallow deer. It appears that in this ancient period, fallow deer were sacrificed as well. So the question is, in that case, how many giraffes did Noah bring? Because as Rashi says, Noah said, the reason Noah believed he brought seven of the kosher animals is to bring sacrifices for them. So the question is, how many giraffes were on the ark? Well, all we need to answer is the giraffe kosher? And it appears that from the sources that we just saw, if the giraffe is kosher, Noah would have brought 7, and Noah would have indeed brought a sacrifice from the giraffe as well. So what we need to know is the giraffe kosher. Now, this would seem to be a very straightforward question. As we'll start in the Torah reading again, we know we're going to get through the entire Torah, and twice in the Torah, we're going to find the rules of which animals are kosher. In Sefer Vayikra and Parshas Shmini, and in Sefer Dvarim and Parshas Re'eh, the Torah is going to tell us very similar rules. How do we know which animals are kosher? Well, it tells us a rule. Kol mafreset parsha v'shoshat shesa parsot malat ger b'leah oso tokelu. Every animal that has fully split hooves and chews its cud is kosher. And then the Torah wants to make sure that we don't get confused. The Torah now goes, we're not going to read it, but the next 4 verses tell us 4 animals that have only one sign: the camel, the anevrit, and the shafan, whatever those are, which have only one sign, that is that they're a ruminant, and therefore they're not kosher because they don't have fully split hooves, and the pig, because the pig has fully split hooves, but it's not a ruminant. So it seems very straightforward. If you read the Torah, split hoof, chews cud, you're kosher. If you have neither of those signs, or only one sign, not kosher. So we have 2 signs, one related to rumination and one related to split hooves. And then the Torah in Dvarim, when it repeats this in Parshat Re'eh, wants to make sure that you really get it. The Torah gives you the signs again, and the Torah gives you a list of 10 kosher animals: shor, the bovine, sexavim, v'seisim, sheep and goats. 3 types of domesticated animals, and then 7 kinds of wild animals: hayal, utzvi, yachmor, vakov, shor, tov, v'zamer. The first few we're pretty sure how to identify. The last few we're not exactly sure how to identify. But again, 10 types of kosher animals, and that's all. And the Rambam tells us, Maimonides says, those 10 are kosher and nothing else. So we have now 2 physical signs and an exhaustive list from the Torah. What's very interesting, and the Rambam, as I said, Maimonides says, these are the only kosher ones. However, if we now go and look at modern taxonomy, it becomes a little more interesting. Modern taxonomy, if we look for animals that have both fully split hooves and chew their cud, we get a list of about 179 animals. And the question is, wait a minute, we just saw we have 2 signs in the Torah, and we have a list of 10 kosher animals. And the question is, what happened? Maimonides said that those were all the kosher animals. So it's very important to understand a little bit about modern taxonomy. And what modern taxonomy is, we all grew up with this system of classifying animals. We learned in high school in biology about species and genus and family, etc. But that's a relatively new system, and it's just one of many possible systems. We all grew up, I can't see all of you because now we have some of the cameras off and I have this shared screen, but if you could indicate, if you remember when we were kids and you were in school and we learned, I don't know, sometime around 4th grade, that a whale is not a fish, but a mammal. And you find a poor kid in class who missed that class, and you start asking him, what's a fish? What's a whale? And there's a fish. And you all make fun of him. No, it's not a fish, it's a whale. Well, the question is, how are we classifying animals? how do we divide them into categories? What criteria do we use? And a very interesting case, an entire book is about a lawsuit. It took place in New York in the early 1800s. At that time, well, I'm originally from New York, so all we learn is New York history. We don't know anything about, west of the Mississippi. Canada is just that wild land north over there. So I don't know if you've learned about New York history at all, but a big industry along the eastern coast, the northeastern coast of the U.S. at that time was whale hunting, whale fishing. And the whale was used for the whale oil. Well, in the early 1800s, there was a new tax that was imposed in New York on fish oil. And the whale hunters decided they're exempt from the fish oil tax. Why? Because a whale is not a fish. And they refused to pay the fish oil tax. And of course, the state of New York took them to court and said, no, a whale is a fish, and you have to pay the fish oil tax. And both put the scientific experts to court. And it was only at the very beginning of the 1800s that the modern taxonomy was starting to take hold, and it had only started to take hold in Europe. So the whalers brought their European scientists as expert witnesses, and these scientists testified, no, of course, a whale is a mammal, it's not a fish, and these poor folks are exempt from the fish oil tax. And in the US, this new taxonomy has not taken hold, and they brought their scientific experts, the state of New York brought them, and they testified a whale is a fish. Take a look where he lives. I don't care that he nurses his young or he has live young. He lives in the water, he swims in the water. He's a fish. And of course, these guys have to pay the fish oil tax. And of course, how did the court decide? Well, whenever there's a question of paying a tax, you have to pay the tax, of course. So the court decided in favor of a whale being a fish. So this modern taxonomy is a very new system, and it's not all clear. The halachic taxonomy would follow the modern taxonomy. So, for example, why is a whale not kosher? I would say a whale is not kosher, not because it doesn't have split hooves and chew its cud, but a whale is not kosher because it doesn't have fins and scale, just like fish. So modern taxonomy serves a useful purpose, but it's not necessarily how halacha would decide. So when we go back and we look at the list of those 10 animals, well, those 10 animals are categories. It's not 10 species in the modern definition. And for example, when it says shore as a bovine, it could be that it includes all of these things down here, bison and buffalo and cow, and all of these type of things that we might have classified today as 20 species might all be kosher under the one word shore in that verse. Okay, now just before we keep going, that was a pretty simple introduction, which you look in the Bible, and I asked you if something is kosher. You would just look, you say split hoof, chew cud. In that list, is it in one of those 10 categories? As we're going to now get a little into more detail, I just want to point out that Sefer HaChinuch, which is a book that lists all of the 613 commandments, tells us that there's a special commandment to learn and to understand how you identify which animals are kosher. And it's not enough just to know that, the OU says this package of meat that I'm buying is kosher, but one should know how on their own to examine the animal and know if it's kosher. So what we're going to do now is we're actually going to engage in this particular biblical commandment of learning how we identify what's kosher. Okay, it seems there are clear biblical signs. Split hoof, chew its cud. And then we have the list if we know how to identify those animals. The question is there anything else that we need to know in order to identify kosher animals? And for example, is there a role for Masorah, for tradition in identifying kosher animals? It would seem at first glance, no. The Bible tells us split hoof, chew its cud. We jump ahead a few years to the compiled in around the year 200 by Rabbi Zivotovsky, and he tells us very simple. The kosher signs of domesticated and wild animals are stated in the Torah. No need to tell you anything more. You jump ahead even to the 16th century. The Shulchan Aruch tells you the signs of kosher animals are explicit in the Torah. Fully split hoof and chew its cud. Where could there possibly be a problem? This seems to be so straightforward. Well, not to worry, the Jews have come up with issues. There are even other signs. Another Mishnah tells us, call the Sheish Lo Kanayim. Any animal that has horns, yesh lo tlafayim, has split hoofs, meaning that it would sound like if it has horns, it's a sign of a kosher animal. V'yesh lo sheyesh tlafayim ve'en lo kanayim, but there are those that have split hoofs, meaning a pig, and it doesn't have horns, and it's not kosher. Okay, so here's where the problem starts to arise. There are, as you noticed, two words that he used, behema and chaya, which I have been loosely translating as domesticated animal and non-domesticated animal. But there are halachic differences between behema and chaya. What's the halachic differences? Well, there are two. One is a kosher chaya. The chaylev, the fats are permitted. As I'm sure you're all aware, outside of the land of Israel today, you only eat the front half of the animal, the forequarters. The hindquarters are sold to non-Jews. Why? The hindquarters have two things. They have the gid hanasha, which is prohibited because of the story of Yaakov, and they have chaylev. Chaylev is certain types of fats. The types of fats, chaylev and shuman. Chaylev is prohibited, and it's very difficult and time-consuming to remove the gid hanasha and chaylev, and therefore, in outside of the land of Israel, where today there are lots and lots of non-Jews, you just sell it to the non-Jews. So in a chaya, in a non-domesticated animal, in a deer, in an antelope, in a giraffe, the chaylev is permitted. While in a behema, it's not. There's also a mitzvah of kisei adam. God has permitted us, again in this parsha, to eat meat. However, we should keep in mind when we're eating meat that we killed an animal in order to do that. And therefore, the Torah commands a symbolic burial. Now, you can't bury it because you're going to eat the meat. But what do? You have to cover the blood. That commandment exists only for chaya, not for behema. So I need to know what's a behema and what's a chaya. How do I distinguish between them? It's not just if it's domesticated. I say, come here, when it comes to me. So the halacha is that the chachamim natnu simanim. There are signs in the horns. Now, in English, it's relatively simple. We have two words, horns and antlers. In Hebrew, there's only one word, karen. So the halacha describes it. Im he mefutsalot, if they are branched, meaning they are antlers, that's a sure sign that it's a chaya, and those fats would be permitted. And that's why, by the way, for a while, I think it wasn't anymore, the OU was selling fallow deer that was raised in upstate New York and was slaughtered in New York, and there they were selling the hind quarter. Because the fallow deer is a chaya, the fats are permitted, and it was relatively easy to take out just to get an usher. So if it has branched horns, that has antlers, it's definitely a chaya. If they're not branched, if it's a horn, then there are three signs: kruchas, aduros, charukos. I don't know what those are, and I'm not embarrassed to tell you I don't know what they are, because the Shach, a commentator on the Shulchan Aruch, tells us. I'm not going to elaborate on this. Why? And this is the key line. The fishain alano ata, we only have now, ela mashi kibalnu b'mesoret, what we have, a tradition. And here we have a problem. What does he mean, what we have a tradition? What kind of tradition do we have, and on what? So I'm not going to open it up to the floor. I'll just present you with the two possibilities that have developed since the Shach wrote this in the 17th century. Either, and this is what some people say, and we'll see in a minute who they, here we go. Some people, meaning, for example, somebody named the Chayot, or the Chachmat Adam on these halachot, where he said we need a tradition to permit any animal. It's not only that we don't know about the horn structure, the antlers, but now we have a tradition for the last 300 years, he says, that we only eat animals that we have a tradition. The biblical signs of split hoof and chew their cud are no longer applicable. This was written by the Chayodim in Vilna in the 1900s, and he was considered the ultimate authority for Lithuanian Jewry. And more than that, if you were a Lithuanian Jew, there are no other Jews. Lithuanian Jews are the final say in the matter. So for the Lita community, the Chachmas Adam says, we only eat animals for which we have a tradition. And this, as you will see, will become very significant. However, the Prima Godim, another commentary, says, what are you talking about? What do I need a tradition for? The Torah tells me, split hoof, chew its cud. Those are very straightforward signs. I don't need a tradition to know which animals are kosher. So that tradition debate took place 200 years ago, and it came right to the 20th century. In the 1950s, here in the state of Israel, there was a great shortage of food, a great shortage of meat. This young country took in double its population in new immigrants. There was rationing of food, and the Jews in France said, you know what, why don't we help out those poor Jews in Israel? There's a meat shortage. France at the time still had a colony called Madagascar. In Madagascar, there was a type of animal called the zebu, and they said, why don't we slaughter zebu and send the meat to Israel? But before doing that, of course, we just have to verify the zebu is kosher. And so they went to the then chief rabbi, the first chief rabbi of the state of Israel, Rabbi Isaac Halevi Herzog, an unbelievable, a fantastic person, really a genius. The man spoke 15 languages fluently. He wrote his PhD identifying the type of snail from which tchelet comes from. An amazing person. They wrote to Chief Rabbi Herzog. They asked Rabbi Herzog, is the zebu kosher? And he wrote basically a summary of what I have told you now about the biblical signs, about the discussion of the horns of the behemoth versus chaya, the debate between the Chachmas Adam and the Pri Megadim, and he concluded, no brainer. Yes, the Chachmas Adam says we only eat those things that we need a tradition, but the halakha is clearly like the Pri Megadim, that you do not need a Masorah, a tradition, to know what animal is kosher. Why do you need a tradition? He says, you only need a tradition to distinguish behemoth from chaya. We don't know what those signs are regarding the horns. You need a tradition to distinguish a behemoth and a chaya, to know if the fats are permitted. But to know if the animal is kosher, no question, we rule like the Pri Megadim that you don't need a tradition. However, at the same time that Rabbi Herzog was writing this, he wrote a letter to another great rabbinic authority in Israel, the Chazon Ish. The Chazon Ish you may have heard of. He was in Bnei Brak. He was the sort of the founding figure of the Haredi community here in Israel. And he wrote to the Chazon Ish, and the Chazon Ish said, no. We follow the Chachmas Adam. The Chachmas Adam is the ultimate authority for Lithuanian Jewry. He ruled you need a tradition even to identify what's kosher and what's not kosher. And not only do we always follow him, but in this case, the Chazon Ish said, he's right. And therefore, we only eat animals which we have a tradition, and therefore the Chazon Ish says, we cannot eat zebu. And so you have this debate. On one side, you have the Chachmas Adam and the Chazon Ish, who say in order for an animal to be kosher, biblical signs are not enough. You need a tradition. On the other side, you have the Pri Megadim, and almost all of the other authorities, in particular Yemenite and Sephardi authorities, who all of them across board say, why in the world should I need a tradition to know if an animal is kosher? We have clear, explicit biblical signs, truther cud and split hoof. Now, this became a question in the United States, and I should say North America. Hello. 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 Did I lose you?
Just for a few seconds.
Hello.
We're with you now.
Okay. Hello. Did I lose you over there?
Yeah, for a minute. We lost your screen as well.
Okay. When did where was I up to there?
You just said that the most of the Sfaradim and the Temanim poskim all Mekel.
Okay. Okay. So let's go back to okay. They across the board, they basically said, why in the world should we need a tradition? We have explicit biblical signs. This became a debate not only in Israel regarding the zebu in the 1950s. In the 1980s, this became an issue in North America, when there were some people who wanted to slaughter what you call, well, what in the US they call buffalo, what's more correctly called bison. Because, of course, there was no tradition for bison. And if you need a tradition, they wouldn't be kosher. If you just have to look if they have split hooves through the cud, they're certainly kosher. And what's amazing, a rabbi in Brooklyn, New York, published an entire booklet called Kashrut HaBaisen. And in there, he goes through this whole discussion, everything we've discussed till now. And he wrote letters to some of the leading authorities in the world, in America and in Israel. And he got a very important letter. He got a letter from Rav Vosner, who's an Ashkenazi rabbi in Bnei Brak, the city of the Chazon Ish. And he said, you know what? If you'd ask me if we could eat bison here in Bnei Brak, I would tell you, we have to worry about the Chazon Ish's position that you need a tradition. But you guys in America, go ahead, rely on all those other authorities, and you can eat bison in America. So for many years, they were indeed shechting bison in North America. Here's my friend Ari Greenspan, who I travel with often, and who I studied shechita with. We're in the slaughterhouse where they were slaughtering bison. This is a few years ago. My understanding is kosher bison is no longer available in North America. Now, go back to the zebu a second. This is what a zebu looks like. It looks very much like a cow. The unique feature is, for example, this hump on its back. This is the animal that the French Jews wanted to slaughter in Madagascar. It also comes from India. A lot of on this, but it again came up in Israel. Now, as you might expect, if you're going to have a kashrut controversy, when should it arise? Right before Pesach. And that's what happened about 15 years ago. 2 weeks before Pesach, someone discovered that most of the meat in Israel comes from South America, and most of the South American meat is a crossbreed of zebu and other types of cattle. And if the zebu isn't kosher, neither is the offspring. So I'm not going to go into, there's a lot of articles on it, and eventually all the kashrut organizations came around and they recognized that it's kosher. But what's very interesting is that when you come to visit Israel, I highly recommend that you visit some of the ancient synagogues that have been found in the Galilee and the Golan. There are tens of synagogues from 1500 years ago that have been uncovered, and many of them with fascinating mosaics. And again, when someone tries to tell you that the Jews and newcomers in the land of Israel, when you go and you visit and you see these synagogues all over the Galilee and the Golan, you understand that there were large communities here going back 1500 years. Well, in one of the synagogues called the Alpha Synagogue, you see what looks like a zebu in the mosaic. Now, that doesn't mean it's kosher. In the mosaic, you also will find eagles and lions. But it looks to me, well, two things. It means, first of all, the zebu was here and known 1500 years ago. And it looks to me like the artist was really highlighting those split hoofs. If you take a look at this, this diagram. Okay, so the next animal I'm going to discuss is the water buffalo. The water buffalo, also called just the buffalo in Europe and in Israel. And the picture on the left, you see there, that's me many years ago holding it. Behind me is Professor Zohar Amar, one of the experts in the field of kosher animals. Behind them is Rabbi Levinger, who has done some of the leading work on defending the shechita against the attack in Europe. And that young water buffalo, this was the last day of his life. And we were interested in knowing about the kosher status of the water buffalo, which we had really little doubt, but we wanted it official. And at the time, the chief rabbi was Rav Amar, a Sephardi rabbi in charge of kashrut. The Ashkenazi rabbi at the time wasn't involved with kashrut. And we approached Rav Amar, and we wanted to know, could we have an official letter from the chief rabbinate attesting to the kosher status of the water buffalo? This was because we were involved in making an exotic kosher dinner where we serve really all kinds of animals. We had about 15 dishes, each one involving an interesting halachic or historic aspect. And we wanted to make it as widely acceptable as possible. So we wanted a letter from the chief rabbi attesting to the fact that water buffalo is kosher. So first of all, we knew we would need a tradition, because the fact that some people need a Masorah, even though Rabbi Amar is a Sephardi, didn't see any need. He's the chief rabbi of the country. He said, I want to make sure there's a tradition. We tracked down this old gentleman, Rabbi Gewirtz. He had been a shochet in Israel in the 1940s, and he testified that in that period, they used to slaughter water buffalo under the chief rabbi of Jerusalem's authority, Rabbi Pesach Frank. They would import live water buffalo and slaughter them as kosher. So we have a tradition now. We also sent Rabbi Amar all kinds of information about the digestive system and the anatomical structure. And there's no question that according to all definitions, the water buffalo chews its cud and has split hooves. What kind of question could there be? We're going to skip all this right now. Masora we took care of. Split hoof, it chews cud, it has. Why was Amar hesitant to give us a letter that is kosher? Well, it turned out Rabbi Amar brought up another issue, that of dentition. Now you're saying, what do teeth have to do with the kosher status of the animal? Well, there's a long piece of Gemara in Masechet Chulin, which talks about a person who is lost in a desert, happens to have a shechita knife with him, and stumbles upon an animal that he doesn't recognize, wants to know if it's kosher. And more than that, this poor animal was trapped by some sort of trap that cut its hooves off, and you can't examine if it has split hooves. So the Gemara tells us that no worries, even though you can't examine if it has split hooves, you could check if it's kosher by just examining its teeth. If it doesn't have upper front teeth, you know it's kosher. And indeed, this law is brought down in the Shulchan Aruch as well. No upper front teeth, it's a sign of a kosher animal as long as you are sure that it's not a baby camel. Baby camels don't have upper front teeth and they're not kosher. And this is correct anatomically. Next time you take your kids, your grandkids, your nephews, either to a petting zoo, you go to the cow, you stick your hand in its mouth, and you could feel on the top that there's just a pad. There's no teeth in the upper front section. There are no upper canines and incisors in kosher animals. And you can do it to a cow, to a sheep, you'll feel that. However, Rabbi Amar, and that's him in the middle, to the left again is Professor Amar, and then me, and then to the right, my friend Ari Greenspan. Rabbi Amar said, listen, you got the Masorah split of Chutzkad, but the way I understand that passage in the Talmud, it's not quite as simple as you understand it. You understand it that if there are no upper front teeth, it's kosher, and that's it. Rabbi Amar said, I understand it bidirectionally. If there are no upper front teeth, it's kosher. If there are upper front teeth, I don't care what else you tell me about the animal, that's a sign it's not kosher. So for me to tell you that the water buffalo is kosher, I need to know if it has upper front teeth. We said, let's go on a field trip. Before you rule in a halacha, you need to know the mitziut. You need to know the facts, right? When any of you come to the rabbi with a question about a pot, or a question about your etro, or a question about whatever, you have to show him the object. He has to know what object we're talking about. You can't rule in a vacuum. So Rabbi Amar said, I need to see if there are upper front teeth in the water buffalo. Well, in Israel, the water buffalo in the Chula Valley, in the nature park in the Chula Valley. So we took him for a trip to the Chula Valley. Oh, well, this didn't work. I don't know. Well, behind you, behind this picture, there's a picture in the Chula Valley. And all we were able to see was some bones that he found. Because whenever we saw off in the distance a water buffalo, and Rabbi Amar would go, come here, water buffalo, come here. None of them were willing to listen to him, even though he's the chief rabbi. So he said, listen, I can't rule unless I know if they're upper front teeth. So he said, okay, you know what? There's a farm down in the south in Moshav Bitzaron, raises water buffalo for its milk. Let's go check out those water buffalo. Here, they're much closer. So we went to visit Moshav Bitzaron. The pictures don't seem to be working. There too, the picture behind is not working, sorry. You could see him opening the mouth, but he still couldn't get the mouth open wide enough to examine. So Rabbi Amar said, that's it. If you want to know if they're kosher, and now you have a real interest in knowing if they're kosher, because this Moshav Bitzaron that's raising it for the milk, they need my certification to continue selling the milk. In order for me to know if it's kosher, I need to know if they're upper front teeth. And the only way I'm going to know that is if I get the head.
Okay, sorry everyone. So it seems to be some technical issues with Zoom.
Open up your mouth, Rabbi. Do you have the up?
Rabbi, we lost you again.
Okay, sorry about that. Let's go back to the share screen. Okay, and I just want you to know, Startup Nation really does have decent internet. We just we lost it recently. Okay. Okay, here we go. Let's go to. Okay, are you there?
Yeah.
Okay. And you see the slides?
No, no screen.
Oh my, hold on. Okay, there's very important slides to see.
There we go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. You now see it?
No, it just went off again.
Okay. Okay. So Rabbi Amar said, I need to know if they're upper front teeth. You have the slides now?
No, it says started screen sharing, but we don't see it. Yeah, now we do. Okay.
Okay. So Rabbi Amar said, I need to know if the water buffalo has upper front teeth. And the only way it seems I'm going to know, he said, is if you bring me the head of a water buffalo to my office in Jerusalem. And so the next day, we had the head of a water buffalo on the table of the chief rabbi's office. And at this point, the water buffalo was very willing to participate. And you can open his mouth. Wow, wow, wow. And you can't see it. There's a problem with this PowerPoint. Hold on. Okay, I'm going to move that picture. Okay. Do you see it now? You could see over here in the water buffalo,
Oh,
in the back, he has molars and premolars. In the front, you see on the bottom, there are canines and inside, or just canines. On the upper jaw, there are no canines and no incisors. No upper front teeth whatsoever in the water buffalo. This made Rabbi Amar very happy. However, Rabbi Amar said, don't think that you could trick me. He says, I know that sometimes you have, as you have humans, young animals that don't have teeth, and then they grow in. How do I know you didn't send me a young water buffalo that would have then grown teeth? Well, thankfully, the guy that I work with is a dentist. And so we took the water buffalo head for an x-ray, and you could see very clearly that there are no upper front teeth that were going to descend at any point. There are no teeth there. There's nothing to see. And this is what the upper jaw looks like. Sheep, and on the right side over there, and in a water buffalo, you could see there's no sockets. There's no place where a tooth could possibly go in. And I invite you, when you come to visit Israel, I have the skull, the bones of this water buffalo, and you could see that there are no jaws. There's no place for teeth to go in. Now, the reason, and then we got a letter from Rabbi Amar. Rabbi Amar said, absolutely, according to the chief rabbinate, according to my opinion, water buffalo is kosher. The reason Rabbi Amar was so insistent on this is if you see the skull on the left side, that's a red deer. A red deer chews cud, has split hooves, etc. But you will notice, if you see that picture on the left side, that on the upper jaw, on the upper part of the skull, you see that there's one tooth coming off over here in the front. And he has one on the other side as well. There's no question the red deer chews its cud. There's no question the red deer has fully split hooves. But Rabbi Amar insists that because of this bidirectional rule regarding upper front teeth, the red deer is not kosher. Many others argue with him. For example, Rabbi Mahmoud, who gives a kosher certification, one of the better-known shoftim in the country, a Yemenite rabbi, says, I don't agree with Rabbi Mahmoud on this. says, in my opinion, there's no question the red deer is kosher. The tooth sign, the unidirectional, if it does not have teeth, it's kosher. If it does have teeth, check out if it meets the biblical signs. Okay, just a few other animals. Here we have the yak. For those who, Israeli kids go off to the Far East, it's kosher, and therefore yak milk is kosher. Some people may remember the Barbaroussa many, many years ago. The New York Times reported about kosher pig. In this too, the New York Times aired, and Barbaroussa is really nothing more than a Southeast Asian pig. It doesn't in any way resemble a ruminant. It's simply a pig, and so it's not kosher. Well, how about giraffe? So we have biblical signs. We've talked about tradition. We've talked about dentition. The only thing we have to talk about, the last thing, is hooves and other giraffe issues. The first giraffe issue that always comes up, and that's if I ask Naomi, we've lost them again.
No, we're good. We're good.
No, my PowerPoint seems to have collapsed. Okay, so you're still there, just the PowerPoint isn't, huh? Okay, let me start the sharing again and get back to the giraffe. Okay, when I ask you, now that I see all of you, until we start the sharing, is giraffe kosher? What's the first thing that someone's going to tell me? Is giraffe kosher or not kosher? Anybody?
Yes.
So why don't they sell it in your local kosher butcher?
That's the $1 million question.
Because they don't make a pen big enough.
Anybody there?
They don't make a
They
pen.
don't make the pens big enough. Okay. Any other suggestions?
Tough meat.
Tough
What?
meat. Okay. Those giving the usual response. What can I tell you? What's the usual response that we get?
Can't shecht it. That's
I'm
what
sorry?
everybody says. You can't shecht it.
Can't check it. Why can't we check it?
Because you don't know where
Sorry?
to.
You don't know where to check it. Okay. That is a very widespread notion. Somebody always says that, and here I had to really pull teeth. I don't know if they were upper teeth, lower teeth, but we had to pull teeth to get that answer. But wherever I speak, people always suggest that we don't slaughter giraffe because we don't know where to check it. Oh boy. Hold on. Okay, it looks like the PowerPoint is back alive. Let's do a share screen. Okay, so that is a very common notion, and you should now see some giraffe on your screen. Has it come back up? Do you have the giraffe?
No,
Do you see the screen at all? Okay, well, I'm going to keep going. Hopefully the pictures will come up in a minute. First of all, in the list of 10 kosher animals that we read at the very beginning from the last one was the Zamar. And I told you the last few names we're not 100% sure how to identify. Well, going back 900 years or 1,000 years to Babylonia, Rav Sadia Gaon said that the Zamar is identified as the giraffe. So there was a tradition that in that list of 10 kosher animals, the giraffe was included. However, what about this business of not knowing where to slaughter it? So we're just going to go through that quickly. You'll have to take my word for it that in the laws of Shechita, it's very clear. The laws of Shechita give us boundaries, upper and lower boundaries, where you're allowed to slaughter. It doesn't give us a specific location. It gives us boundaries. So in a pigeon, you have a few inches. A cow, you have a foot. And a giraffe, you have close to 6 feet. However, for a while, I thought that maybe I'm the only one to know this. Wherever I go, people talk about not knowing where to slaughter a giraffe. So I finally contacted the head of meat for the OU. This is going back about 15 years ago. And he said that obviously we know where to slaughter a giraffe. And he said that he who doesn't know where to shecht the giraffe either knows nothing about the laws of shechita or the proverbial guy who couldn't hit the side of a barn with a baseball, meaning you can't miss. So is giraffe kosher? Well, first of all, we don't have any question about where to slaughter. Are there any other questions? Well, turns out that there were these, I don't know if you get them in Vancouver. Here, where the synagogues used to be open, a stack of these parsha sheets every week. One of them, and I took out the name of who wrote it because it's a very strange thing over here. It says here, some post question whether giraffes have fully split hooves. And he goes on and starts talking about a giraffe has a thin pad under its toes. And the question is whether this pad is significant enough to prevent the hoof from being considered fully split. As a pad, hoof, what's he talking about? Very strange. So what is a split hoof? Well, there's a llama, and here you can see the llama's hooves. The llama's hooves, if you look at them from the front, look indeed split. But when the llama picks up his hoof, you can see that it's fully fused in the posterior half. Are you seeing any of these pictures?
Yes.
Okay, so you see from the front, it looks split. He picks up the hoof. It's not split all the way through, which is what is required for it to be kosher. How about a camel? Well, you see there, my hoof is not split at all. The camel's hoof looks like it's split in the front. However, we know that the Torah says the camel has only one sign. It's a ruminant, but doesn't have split hooves. And indeed, there also, if the camel picks up its hoof, you could see that it's not split in the whole back half. And what's amazing is, we're not going to go through it now because it's getting late. But if you look at Rashi from northern France beautifully describes exactly what you just saw for the structure of a camel hoof. Now, did Rashi ever see a camel hoof, or was this all based on tradition from his teachers? I have no idea. But it beautifully describes a camel hoof and why a camel's hoof is not considered fully split and a camel not kosher. A pig, the Torah tells us a pig's hoof is split, and indeed, if you take a look at a pig's hoof, it's fully split. The red deer, which Rav Amar talked about regarding not being kosher because of the teeth, but there's no question its hooves are fully split. The question is, what about the giraffe? Well, there is a giraffe hoof, and you can see that it is fully split. There's no question that it's fully split. And if any of you want to see this for real, you can either go to a zoo and try to get the giraffe to pick up its hoof, or next time you visit in Israel, feel free to come visit. I have the giraffe leg in my house. Where did I get the giraffe leg from? Well, there were others who had other questions about the kosher status of a giraffe. We're not going to do all of this. Oh, wow. There was a, you know what? I took it out. I didn't have the audio anymore. There was a Sephardi rabbi in Brooklyn who gave an audio share about the kashrut of the giraffe, and he talked something about de-skinning. And he said that you have to be able to de-skin. I don't know exactly what he wanted to know, but he said you can't de-skin a giraffe. Now, that was going to be much harder to check. But thankfully, a bunch of years ago, we got a call from the Ramat Gan Safari. A giraffe had died, and they wanted to know, did we want to do a post-mortem on it? Now, how could you turn down such an offer? So we went and we assembled a team of rabbis, veterinarians, a lawyer, a dentist, and we went and we did a post-mortem on a giraffe, looking at anything that might be related to the halacha, the structure of the neck, seeing if those boundaries that are given where to slaughter apply to a giraffe, looking at how the fats looked in the hind quarter of a giraffe, looking at the structure of its digestive system, and it had the four stomachs, four sections of the stomach the other kosher animals do, etc. So we also, of course, tried de-skinning it. If this rabbi in Brooklyn wanted to de-skin a giraffe, we will de-skin a giraffe for him. And so we did a full post-mortem of the giraffe. And you could see there was our team, a motley crew of a lawyer and a dentist and a veterinarian. We did a full dissection. We each have one of those lower legs now. So if anybody questions whether a giraffe has fully split hooves, you can come and see it. So first of all, an important lesson from all of this is that in order for a rabbi to rule, is a giraffe kosher, it's very, very important they clarify the facts. Does it have fully split hooves? Could you de-skin? Does it have upper front teeth? And Rav Amar, of course, asked that, and we, of course, checked, and we, of course, not only did an X-ray, we'll get back to this in a second. Okay, you know what? We did an X-ray on it, but it's very, very important to clarify. Okay, hold on, we're back on. Okay, are we back?
Yeah.
Okay. As I was saying, it's very important for a rabbi to clarify the facts. We have now hopefully made it easier for rabbis to rule on the kosher status of a giraffe. We published the results of the section both in Hebrew and Tchumen and in English in the Torah Umada journal, so that it's clear to one and all, giraffes have fully split hooves. Giraffes chew their cud. The structure of the digestive system is the same as for other kosher animals. There are no upper front teeth, no question of them growing in. We did the X-ray. So is a giraffe kosher? Well, it seems that a giraffe is indeed kosher. Why in your local kosher butcher don't they sell giraffe? It's really the reasons that that you folks mentioned early on. First of all, the meat is not considered very good. Second of all, it would be very, very expensive. Why? Well, a giraffe is pretty expensive, but even more so because, as someone said, they don't make pens that size. To slaughter a kosher animal, you can't anesthetize it. It has to be restrained live and awake. To restrain a giraffe is very difficult. Giraffe are, I'll stop the share. Giraffe are extremely strong animals. As a director of one of the zoos that I spoke to, the zoo in Cheyenne, Wyoming, said, an adult giraffe could kill a lion with one kick. He could send you to the next county. And then I remembered in Wyoming just how big the counties are. Giraffes are very, very strong animals, and to restrain it is very difficult. So really the reason we don't eat kosher giraffe is it's expensive, it's difficult. It's not that they're endangered. Until very recently, nobody suspected even that the giraffe were in any danger. Today, if you read, there's some discussion about some of the subspecies of the giraffes being endangered, but in general, giraffe is not an endangered species. So the reason is mostly technical. But is giraffe kosher? It would seem to me that it answers all of the requirements, except one. If you live in Bnei Brak and you're going to follow the Chazon Ish, who requires a tradition, we don't have a tradition on slaughtering giraffe. Jews in Lithuania and Poland never slaughtered giraffe. If you follow any other of the authorities, any of the Sfardim, any of the Yemenite, and many of the Ashkenazim, there's no need for a tradition. And in that case, we look at it as split hoof and short cud. It does. Even according to former Chief Rabbi Amar, it doesn't have upper front teeth and would be kosher. And all of those other questions that came up would not seem to be a problem. So again, you may hear about giraffe being in danger in terms of approaching, becoming endangered. This is a relatively new thing that applies to some of the subspecies, but not to other of the subspecies. I'm not advocating that you go and hunt giraffe, but just that's not the reason why we don't eat it. And indeed, in South Africa today, in Namibia, it's legal, and there are people there who have offered to trap and restrain a giraffe and slaughter it. Anyway, that's not what we're getting into. We want to know how many giraffe were on Noah's Ark. It would seem that unless Noah paskined like the Chazon Ish, he would have had 7 giraffe. So anyway, I understand we have a giraffe expert online here. I would love to be in touch, and you might find some of the our write-up of interest. For example, where's our giraffe expert? Who is that?
Sam.
I'm sorry?
Sam.
Sam, you want to show your face? And because, for example, one of the interesting things we found in the dissection related to the gallbladder. It turns out that giraffe doesn't have gallbladder. We didn't know this before we started. We were really excited when we discovered that. We wondered if it had any halachic ramification on the kashrus of the giraffe. It turns out that this is a well-known thing, that it wasn't a malfunction and a misdevelopment in this giraffe, and that all giraffes don't have gallbladder. But giraffes are an amazing creature. The rabbi at the beginning introduced me as a professor of neuroscience. My background actually is in biomedical engineering, and I did not study in Johns Hopkins. I studied in Cleveland Case Western Reserve University, but in Johns Hopkins, back then, the first year program, biomedical engineering, had a course on the biomedical engineering of the giraffe, because every aspect of it, how it could breathe, how does the air go up and down through that long neck and have an exchange of gases? How does its head not explode when it lowers its head to the ground to drink? And then how does it not pass out when it raises its head again and the blood pressure drops to the brain? So the giraffe is really a wonder of creation. Instead of talking about, is it kosher, one could talk about the engineering design of the giraffe and how God designed it with a lot of very interesting aspects so that it could survive in its strange shape. So the giraffe is an amazing creature. If Sam ever wants to be in touch, I have a huge collection of papers on the bioengineering of the giraffe and the unique aspect. Not that I've written it,
There's a woman there's a woman, I believe she's at the University of British Columbia, who apparently is an expert on giraffes, and she cautioned that they are in some trouble in some areas in Africa. So that's all I know. I'm not an expert on giraffes, but I can ride horses.
Okay.
With giraffes.
Okay, someone just wrote, by the way, about milk of a non-kosher animal not curdling. That's correct. The Talmud mentions that. And indeed, I showed you pictures of Professor Zohar Amar. He actually milked the giraffe and experimented, and it does curdle. You can make cheese out of the milk of a giraffe. So again, all of the signs relating to kosher animals apply to a giraffe. No question that that the giraffe is kosher. Okay, if there are any other questions?
Is there a more of a siman with the teeth than the chewing of the cud and the split hooves? Like across the board?
I'm sorry, is there more of a question?
Is there more of a siman with regards to the upper teeth as opposed to the chewing the cud and split hooves across the board with kosher animals?
Well, the biblical signs, again, split hoof and chewing the cud are the signs. How do you understand them? So Rav Sadia Gaon, he mentions about also the teeth, and he says that all the other signs we have, for fish, we have fins and scales. For animals, there's the split hoof. On grasshoppers, you have wings that cover most of the body. These are physical, not behavioral, anatomical, not physiological. And he actually understood chewing cud as being no upper front teeth. He viewed those two signs as being the same thing. But most authorities don't understand it that way. Most authorities, and again, except for Rav Amar and former chief rabbi of Jerusalem, Rabbi Mishash, who had a similar understanding to Rav Amar, understood that it's a shortcut. If there are no upper front teeth, that tells me choose its cud. And then I don't have to wait and see its behavior, because I can just look at the physical sign. And that's how most authorities understand it, that it's a shortcut. But if it has teeth, I can just check if it chews its cud, and if it chews its cud, I don't care about the teeth. Rabbi Amar understands that the teeth are a separate sign, maybe related, maybe not related to chewing its cud. And but even according to him, it seems the only animal that it affects is the red deer, which I should point out in North America, it's called the elk. The elk and the red deer are the same. They actually, even according to modern taxonomy, used to be the same species. Until very recently, some genetic differences were found, and some have divided them. But the red deer and the elk are essentially the same. They do not have upper front. They do have that upper front teeth, and that's the only place where this debate with Rav Amar comes up. But otherwise, the two signs, the biblical signs and the upper teeth overlap totally.
Did I see correctly that Rabbi Yitzchak Isaac Herzog said that that all deers are okay, or he wasn't talking about the red deer? I thought
I don't know.
noticed
I don't know
in
if he
the
addressed it. I don't know. I'm not
I
sure if
saw
he
it. I
addressed it
noticed in
already.
the tube over there.
Okay.
Is
I
it-
don't remember. I don't remember if he addressed
What's the public consensus with regards to red deer? Is that only Rav Amar says it's tameh or
it. Really only Rav Amar. Now,
Wow.
it hasn't become too practical because although there are two farms that about 15 years ago imported red deer from Australia to raise them for their meat, and that's why, by the way, if you look up in the rabbinic literature here in Israel, they all talk about the Australian deer. They don't call the red deer, they don't call the elk, they call the Australian deer because it was imported from Australia. Both of those farms no longer raise them for meat because the Ministry of Agriculture put a stop on it. Nothing to do with the kashrut of it. There was a big lawsuit. The Ministry of Agriculture stopped it. The farm sued them, and the government lost. Our tax money went. We had to pay a lot of money to those farms because of the mistake of the Ministry of Agriculture. So it's only now rarely that they're slaughtered, and usually Rav Mahmoud is the one who shechs them, and he thinks they're kosher, and that's pretty much the consensus, that the tooth sign is a unidirectional sign. Yes, the London Bezdin used to shech deer. They're actually, about a year ago, they shechted it not in the UK. They shechted it elsewhere in Europe. It was a secret place. They didn't tell where they were slaughtering, and they imported deer to London. It was not red deer. It was fallow deer. And from what I understand, it's no longer available. It was just a short-lived experiment. Okay, if there are any other questions? Again, I apologize for the technical issues. We had an internet problem here recently, and we're still waiting for the technician to come. Okay.
Okay, Rabbi, thank you very
Thanks,
much.
Rabbi.
Truly a pleasure. It was very inspiring and very, very informative. I never knew a lot of the things you said. Thank you very much.
Okay, and if you'd like, I could send you the PDFs of the article about the giraffe, the one from the Torah Mada Journal,
Yes,
and
please. We can share with the community.
or if you'd like, I could also send you the PowerPoint, and you could look at Rav Herzog, you could look at the sources there.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Rabbi.
By the way, Rabbi Zivotovsky has written some very interesting articles you can find on a website in a journal called Hakira. I think it's hakira.org, on the Muscovy duck and a few others, right?
Yes. Do you have any South Africans in the community in Vancouver?
Yes, quite a lot. Actually.
Oh,
I
yes.
talked to them.
There's one here tonight.
Asked them about a fish called the kingclip, which had a very interesting controversy. So that we also wrote about in Hakira, and the South Africans that was one of their big halakha controversies, was this fish, the kingclip. Okay.
Thanks, Rabbi.
Rabbi,
Very
thank you
good.
very
So have a Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks everyone
Shabbat
for coming.
shalom. Thank you. It was interesting.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thanks.